Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Mrs. Casile, and thanks to all of you for being here. Since the very beginning of my career, I have believed that photographers are somehow like doctors. The cardiologist, the orthopedic, the dentist, and the GP. I may have a toothache, then I go straight to the dentist. But I may have heart diseases, then I turn to the GP who will prescribe a special screening. Now, photography has different specializations, just like medicine, reportage, architecture, portrait, still life, and each photographer expresses himself at his best in the most congenial field to him. Then, just as for medicine, there's a general photographer too, even though I have never seen a general photographer telling what specialist to turn to. As years have passed by, I've started considering a further distinction that refers to photography rather than medicine. In addition to documentary photography and interpretative photography that are already well known, another kind of photography can be released, which we can actually define as perceptive photography. The specializations listed out are both included in documentary as well as in interpretative photography. As for the former, the photographer releases a photocopy of reality without any peculiar personalization, whereas instead, as for the latter, I mean interpretative photography, he reproduces the object mediating with his own personality, his way of seeing, and his own point of view. As for the point of view, then, let's say that when the photographer is able to render it constantly, when he is aware of how he sees the world, he then acquires his own style, his visual calligraphy, which by clicking turns into photo-printigraphy. If a style is recognizable, it inevitably comes out of the reading of a photographic course. And talking about the reading of photos, to me both documentary and interpretative photography do find a parallelism, respectively, with iconographic and iconological reading, already theorized by Erwin Panofsky regarding painting. The iconographic reading is just a plain description of the image. It is restricted to the documentation of the components, the recognizability of the objects. On the other hand, the iconological reading refers to free associations defined as symbols, in this case searching for the reason why they have been released or arranged in a certain way. However, in photography, better than in painting, just thanks to the realistic rendering of the elements, in addition to the rational or iconographic reading, the observer's evocative reading is strong indeed. For instance, in the photo depicting a meadow, we recognize the elements by means of a rational reading. The grass, the trees, the brook, all and each have been framed by the photographer. On the contrary, as for the emotional approach, the observer lets himself go to an evocative reading. The recognizability of the objects released gives way to the sensations and remembrances of having spent happy moments around and about a similar meadow, or the Sundays we are used to drawing out our pet to take a run around the meadows surrounding home. So, if rational reading is limited by the number of the elements, the emotional one may involve numberless emotional feedbacks, a kind of Chinese boxes of thoughts, however linked to the reality of what we do see. Perceptive photography is no representation or interpretation of the material of an object or subject, yet it is something closer. It is a kind of image that goes beyond the personal point of view, with which we try to show an object that is anyway recognizable. For instance, a poppy can be a snapshot and therefore represented in many different ways, each one as for the photographer who releases it. Nevertheless, the observer keeps on seeing a poppy anyhow. What if I released not just a poppy as I see it, but I would try to render what I see in that poppy? I would get something that goes beyond the object itself, an image that does not necessarily reproduce the sense of the flower. As for perceptive photography, for which the perception is first of all the photographer's one, the object-subject is not the one to be represented as it appears, but the perception the photographer has of it. As a consequence, such thing gives way to the observer's several interpretations, which are different either from the conventional recognizability of the content of the image, or from any hint and reference it evokes. There are no more recognizable objects arising sensations linked to their own reality. As for perceptive photography, the observer is urged to follow the photographer's transfiguration, even changing the reading of what the photographer has seen still further, transfiguring it once more. As a matter of fact, while the elements of traditional photography do not change, the dynamic with which these same elements are brought into play is indeed another thing. Actually, the photographer is free to transfigure. The observer has instead the further opportunity of personalizing this same transfiguration. I started working out such considerations many years ago, when I used to work just as an advertising photographer, and I mainly used them as a means to transform the art director's layout into photography. I was reaching my daughter's school, and as you can see outside almost any school, there was a long queue of modes. My daughter's one was standing among them. It was near other 3 or 4 alike, same brand, same color. They were parked more or less in the same way, yet I immediately singled out my daughter's mold, even though I didn't have any scratches of identifying marks that could have guided me. That very moment I was reminded with my father's car too, when I used to feel the same sensation. I could recognize his car from far away, even before reading the plate or seeing who was driving. It was as if the car, or the moat, were recognizable to me, not just from their aspect, but rather from something that went beyond the object themselves, a sort of message that was not sent by shapes or colors. It was a sort of imperceptible link made of sensations. The first thing that came up to my mind was how I might have released that very perception. Then, how I might have released the message so as to show the message sent rather than merely the material itself. I then started looking around in a completely new way, trying to go beyond the material. What increased my fantasy more than anything else was the image of washing drying on a line. I thought about the way in which it was arranged. I could figure out a family's life by reading it. It told about the personality of the one who had hung it out in the sun, of his habits, his relationships with the other members of the family. Seeing small-sized clothes, maybe the children's behind their parents' ones, hanging on the front line, made me think of a sense of protection. But a separation between a suit and a dress with a space in between told me about couple problems. No doubt such fantasy was no scientific result. It was the perceptive deduction that I was trying to shoot. Nevertheless, I was unable to find a kind of fil rouge to link up all those attempts. I was photographing my fantasy. I was not releasing what was in front of my eyes. I was trying to listen to the message coming out of all that I was looking at. This inevitably brought me to feel muddled and rather disorganized while making a choice. We must say that, historically speaking, except for some examples, and I would remind you of the Two Peppers and the Lettuce by Edward Weston above all, photography has usually been employed as a means to document reality as well as to emphasize it, following a constructive process that maintains that the element to be reproduced lies in the material, a constructive process that keeps the conceptual originality. The use of the camera has enabled the photographer to overcome the technical hindrances of painting. However, the different constructive process of painting has changed the photographer's conceptual approach together with his interpretative skills. Painting means touching by the hands as well as by the eyes. It means to feel the image forming under the strokes. The thing is not yet completed. It gradually comes out after a process that first of all belongs to the mind.